You should have put an X on the floor or something like that. Okay. Right. Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
It's great. I actually got a response this time. I love that. It's great to have you all here. So, like Adam said, we're doing a series on the fivefold ministry, which is in Ephesians 4, not Ephesians 3. Sorry, Adam. It's okay. I've got a note. So, it's a series on the fivefold ministry. It's and actually, if it's all right, can we get the verse? It's Ephesians 4:11, and these are so Christ Himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers. And as I was praying about what to include in this talk, I felt like God was saying that these are the rights of leadership, and I had no idea what He meant by that. And it was only this afternoon, as I was praying about it and as I was writing my talk, and I felt like He was saying that, like us as the body of Christ, as the church, we have a right to this kind of leadership. So before you start thinking about how charismatic a leadership, where's my microphone's died. I'm going to keep speaking until this. Oh, there we go. So before you start thinking about how charismatic a church is or how gifted the leaders are, it doesn't matter if it's a soul survivor plant like us or if it's a HDB plant or anything like that. Before you start thinking about anything else in a church leadership, I felt like God was saying that, like as people of God, as citizens of heaven, these are our rights to have leadership and people in our community who lead us in the apostolic, in the prophetic, in evangelizing, pastoring and teaching. So I'm speaking on pastoring this evening. And I want to kick straight in by reading a story that a lot of us will probably know. It's in Mark 6. If you guys have got Bibles or an app on your phone, it's going to come up on the screen anyway. But even if you don't know this story, well, then you're in for a treat. Hearing it for the first time. It is about Jesus feeding the 5,000. So I'm just going to read the story. So I'm starting. It's Mark 6, verse 30. The apostles. Oh, that's another one. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up the 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. So just to recap that story a little bit. So Jesus is teaching in a remote place to lots of people. And it's getting late, so the disciples say to him, "Hey Jesus, send them away so they can get to Tesco's before it closes." I've modernised it a little bit. They can get to Tesco's or Mackey's before it closes. And Jesus, knowing full well what he was about to do, says to them, "No, you find them something to eat." And after some discussion, they give Jesus these 5 loaves and 2 fishes, And Jesus blesses them and then divides it up amongst the 12 disciples. So they all have a basket with a little bit of this bread and a little bit of this fish in to feed 5,000 families with. Right? So it's not like I saw a movie once. So like you have these movies about the life of Jesus. And like it's not like in the movies where I saw one where like he had like one basket full of bread, which is kind of by faith the basket is a lot bigger than the amount of bread in it, and like one basket with the 2 fish in it, and he just like lifts it up like that, and then he brings it down and it's like overflowing with bread and fish, and like you know those kind of weird, like Jesus is always white for some reason in them. Like it's not like in the It's not like in the movies. Like you read here that Jesus actually divided up these 5 loaves of bread and said, okay, like you get like a little bit in your basket, you get a little bit in your basket, go and feed these 5,000 people with it. So, and then like evidently what happened, like they were giving it out and it just never ran out. That's what we read, right? So, I was reading this story about 4 months ago, and I've read I grew up in a Christian family. I've heard and I've read the story of feeding 5,000 loads and loads of times. So I guess the wonder of it sometimes is a little bit lost on me. How weird and wonderful it is. But about 4 months ago, I was reading this passage, and one word got my attention. And it's in verse 39. It's where Jesus said, then Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. And the word green got my attention, right? Because I believe that the Bible is inerrant. So that means that every word in the Bible is there in its original text, not necessarily in the translation, but in its original text, in the original Hebrew, in the original Greek. I believe that every word is there for a reason. So I'm a bit like, why did Mark write that it was green? But they've crammed in all these stories and all these things about Jesus into this book. Why did they have to say that it was green? And it was quite late, so I thought about it for a bit, and then I just went to bed. But then I was still thinking about it, and then suddenly another bit of the Bible came to mind, and it was Psalm 23. So this was written about 1,000 years before the life of Jesus. This was written by David. So bearing in mind what Jesus did, he made the people sit down on the green grass. This is what it says in the first 2 verses of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. I'll say that again. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Notice how Jesus got the 5,000 to sit down on the green grass. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. So you might be thinking, Greg, that's really interesting, but what has this got to do with pastoring? What's this got to do with pastoral leadership? So the word pastor actually comes from the Latin shepherd. Okay, so when we say the word pastor, we literally mean the word shepherd. So in that verse in Ephesians 4, where it talks about the apostles, the prophets, the pastors, you can easily swap it with shepherd, and it would mean exactly the same thing. So whenever you hear the word pastor, you can think shepherd, and whenever you think shepherd, you can think pastor. And Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd." That's in John 10, I think. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd." So I just want to unpack what that means for us a little bit, because I think there's a really important spiritual principle in that story of the feeding the 5,000 for pastoring. So number one, focusing on that, those words that Jesus said later on in his ministry, where Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd." And remember, pastor equals shepherd, shepherd equals pastor. And so, a good pastor is someone who fixes their eyes on Jesus and points others to Jesus, because Jesus is, you could say, the ultimate shepherd. He's the good shepherd. At the end of the day, it says in the Bible, we are all like sheep gone astray. So it's important to remember that no matter what position of leadership we're in, no matter what we're doing in our ministry, in our lives, we always have this call, we always have this responsibility to keep our eyes on Jesus and to point other people to Jesus. We fix our eyes on him. You know, it would have been really bonkers if Andrew or one of the other disciples, after they'd taken their basket and fed all these people, it would have been really bonkers if like Andrew or one of them decided, oh, I'm going to start a bread multiplication ministry right now. This was really successful. Like, you know, that would have been most of they said like, oh, I have a limitless supply of bread. I should start a restaurant. This would be, you know, it would have been bonkers because Jesus was the one who did all the work, right? Like, the focus of that story is on Jesus, because in him we lack nothing. And it goes back to Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. And the feeding of the 5,000 is a real example, it's a real life example of what is true in all things, of what is true in the spiritual. Because Jesus actually said the next day, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will not go hungry. So Jesus is the good shepherd. We keep our eyes on him because no matter what we're doing, no matter what we're called to, it's all about fixing our eyes on him and leading other people to him. Before I go on to the next point, there was something that Beth Croft said once. She was comparing it to John the Baptist, but sometimes what we're called to do, we point the way to Jesus. No, we make the way for Jesus, we point the way to Jesus, then we get out the way of Jesus. So number 2, the first one, Jesus is the good shepherd. Number 2, everything we have will never be enough for what Jesus intends to do, but he'll use it anyway. Everything we have will never be enough for what Jesus intends to do, but he will use it anyway. Because, you know, the disciples were actually being considerate. You can be forgiven for thinking that the disciples were just tired and say, Jesus, send them home, we've had enough of them. But actually they were thinking, like, hey, Jesus, these guys are going to get hungry soon. We don't want them to go hungry. Like, send them away now so that they can get some food. They were actually being considered. They wanted them to get fed. But the issue was that they weren't actually thinking big enough, because the disciples just didn't want the 5,000 families to go hungry. But Jesus wanted to show these people that in him you lack nothing. Like, he had a higher agenda. He had a bigger plan than what the disciples had. And then he just messed with them a little bit. He's like, oh, you give them something to eat. You know, like you expect them to buy something? And sometimes God does that. Sometimes God will ask something seemingly impossible so that we will rely on him more. God will give us a task that's totally beyond our capability and out of our depth, because he wants to show us something about what he is like. There's a guy I quote a lot, Bonnie and Adam read me a lot, a guy called Graham Cook, and he was part of the leadership of a church in Southampton a few years ago, and he wanted to start a homeless ministry. He wanted to buy a house, and a bit like the Haven down the road, buy a house so that they could like house homeless people and feed them and like, you know, have a ministry for homeless people. So he was praying about it, and he said, "Oh God, like, you know, if we could get like, you know, $250,000 for this house, you know, and we'll be able to do this." And he felt God was saying, "Okay, well, what will that do?" He's like, "Well, we'll be able to, you know, house like 12 people at a time." It's like, okay, 12 people. What about the other 750 in this city? And as Graham was praying about it more, he felt like God was saying, I want you to house hundreds of homeless people, but it's not going to cost you a penny. And what they ended up doing as a church, they started this ministry called Night Watch, where thousands of people in the city opened up their homes for one night to homeless people, and they'd give them a meal, they'd give them a place to sleep, they might buy them some clothes, or and then in the morning they'd have another meal. They might give them some money to help them for the next few days, and they basically started this ministry of generosity amongst people in the city. And like God said, it didn't cost them a penny. It only cost them a few administration fees, which the council ended up paying for anyway. And see, that's sometimes how God sometimes says something that seems so beyond our comprehension. No, I want you to house hundreds of homeless people in this city, but I'm not going to give you any money for it. Like a bit like the minibus. Like Bonnie had this dream, this God-given dream for a minibus, and I'll admit, I was with Adam. I thought it was a stupid idea. I thought we've got so many other things that we feel like God is doing. That we need to fund. I can't be bothered with the minibus. I'll just borrow Barnwell's one again. But God sometimes gives us a dream. God sometimes gives us something that seems inexplicable and out of our depth. And the thing with this homeless ministry in Southampton was that it goes back to the same thing where the disciples had one idea, but God had another idea. Graham, when he had this idea, he just wanted to try and feed and house a few people at a time. But God wanted them to encounter kindness. God wanted them to encounter generosity. God wanted them to encounter family. Because these people, they wouldn't just feed them and give them a bed for the night. They'd also talk to them. A lot of them would also pray with them. These guys encountered the kingdom in a way that would never happen in a homeless shelter. That would never happen if it was just, someone going around and handing out sleeping bags or food on the street. God has a high level of faith in any of us. So it always helps to listen to what he's doing, to look for the next big idea. So that was number 2. Everything we have will never be enough for what Jesus intends to do, but he'll use it anyway. Number 3, and this isn't quite off of the feeding of 5,000, but I think it's important. Number 3, we are called to pastor each other. Because, if being a pastor is being a shepherd, it's mostly, in its most basic form, feeding and leading people. Like what I said earlier, fixing our eyes on Jesus and leading other people to Jesus. And a good pastor is one who recognises that he or she is another sheep. And if you actually look on from Ephesians 4:11, and it will come up on the screen again. So I'll read the original verse from Ephesians 4. I'm just going to turn back to it quickly. Sorry, Adam, I've just dropped your notes. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness in Christ. What does that mean? So those 5 giftings, those five rights that we have to leadership, they're meant so that we can build each other up, so that we can grow in faith together as a community, as a body, as people of God. It's so that we can get to know God together. If you use the analogy of us being sheep in a herd? No. Flock, that's it. If we use the analogy of us being sheep in a flock, I imagine it a little bit like, if Jesus is the good shepherd, we're all following Jesus. Because Jesus said, I'm a good shepherd, my sheep know my voice. That's us, we're the sheep. My sheep know my voice, and I know them. If we're just, using this analogy where we are just sheep following Jesus, if we've all got our eyes on Jesus, then it's a lot easier for when people go astray and when people, might look the other way. It's much easier for us to say, no, this is the real deal. And actually, that verse Paul writes in Ephesians as it goes later on about how we won't be swayed by other teaching and by false teaching. If as a community we keep our eyes on Jesus and we encourage each other to keep our eyes on Jesus, then we'll go places together. We will do so much more, and we'll do everything that Jesus intends for us together. So let's be a community that keep our eyes